Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Ro, for telling you to turn off your cell phones. This will allow you to keep Google from knowing exactly what you're doing at the moment, which is, of course, thematically consistent with what we're going to talk about. The new world is technologically different, and we think about when a day in our current life and what kinds of things that we may do that may divulge information. Well, if you get up and you happen to go online and order a book, I think you all know that they're recording the information, and that whatever book you order, you will probably get advertisements for a similar book very soon. If you go on Facebook, which I'm not sure how many of you are on Facebook, but I have kids, and I tell them, don't do any of this. But they go on Facebook and they talk about what they dreamed last night or what they thought about. And so where is that going to go? Well, it's going to go to their 600 best friends. Now, they haven't lived long enough to understand that you don't have 600 friends. I don't know anybody who has 600 friends. At least some of those people are not actually your friend. They're probably your enemy. Or they're jealous of you, or they just might decide to send that information somewhere where it doesn't do you any good. You drive to work, you go through a toll booth. You're, of course, aware that if you have one of those passes, it will note that you were there. If you park in a lot with a closed-circuit television, it'll undoubtedly record that you were there. And there are some places in the world, like London, where they say an average citizen could be on a closed-circuit television about 100 times a day. So the world has changed. You turn on your office computer, you're of course aware you're monitored. It could be monitored down to keystrokes. And you've agreed to do that. And you visit websites, and you know that when you visit a website, they know you visited the website. And not only do they know you visited the website, they know what other websites you visited. And they're developing a profile. You tell your 500 friends you'll be out of town. That's a very bad idea. You go to a drugstore and use a discount card. Now, we're all familiar with using credit cards. And credit cards have lots of rules that surround them. They're pretty good. But a discount card doesn't. Why? Because it's not a credit card. It actually is giving you a break. And it's one of the reasons it's able to give you a break is because they're probably selling your information. And then when they swipe your discount card, they, of course, see what you bought. And that will help them in marketing. Use a credit card at a gas station, you, of course, could lose it to a skimmer. They have, those things are out there now. You go to a shopping mall. I love this. This is it says LBM, which is location-based marketing, which you probably haven't heard of because it's just getting started. So this is a combination of when the cell phone company and the GPS gets together with Amazon and all the other folks who know what you like. So if you're walking by the mall and you're known to like a certain kind of shoe, they will tell you that Macy's will give you 10% off if you just walk in, because they know where you are and they know what you like. So now keep in mind there are a lot of people who are going to love this. I have a class, and they're people in their 20s who are very used to Facebook and so forth. So I have this scale of, do you like that or is it creepy? And it depends. There are some people who like to be told that you're walking by a Starbucks and it'll get you $2 off. They're walking by a shoe store and get you 10% off. Some people think it's kind of creepy. Of course, I'm older, I think it's kind of creepy. Offend your neighbor. Now, there's some interesting, there are websites that have all sorts of interesting postings. If somebody doesn't think that you cleaned up after your dog, they may post that. If they don't like something else they're doing, they may post that. And there are websites that make some kind of a business doing that. And if you get in an accident on the way home, this is my whole problem with the press, which we'll talk about later, that you just involuntarily became newsworthy because of what happened to you, not of anything that you've done of your own volition. So this is you, and in the new world, there are corporations whose business it is to gather information about you and make that available to employers, to advertisers, etc. There are other people who intrude either for good or bad purposes. There's the media and there's government. And all of these have a reason to know more about you, and they do. Now, you can't read this, but if this is a very old cartoon, and I will read it. And so you can see, what you can see is this is a reel-to-reel computer. And I asked somebody, you know, how big do you think this would be today? You know, somebody said, you know, iPhone. And what this fellow is saying to the person who looks relatively disturbed is, we have some facts about you that you don't remember, some facts that you thought were really secret, and some that never even happened. And that sort of summarizes the dangers. May have happened, may have not happened. Now, defining privacy is impossible. But basically it's about personal liberty and what you think should be your own information or your own options. There are two types, volition and information intrusions. Now, volition means you think that you have a right to decide how to die, for example. Well, not necessarily. There are interests of the state, and the volition or decisional interests are always a conflict of the state. But I'm going to focus more on information. And this is about data intrusion and knowing your own identity and how much you're able to keep to yourself in a new world. Now, what's different now? The big letters, human nature is the same. I'm working on a book now, and one of the chapters, which I got encouraged to do, is, well, what are the factors in human nature that affect how we act about information? We love information. We love gossip. We are curious. And it's probably a matter of survival. The person who knew the most information was going to be more successful, whether that was finding where you could successfully hunt, finding where you could successfully plant, finding out whether that was going to be a good wife or a good husband. And we love gossip. And who says that gossip is useless? You may find information in gossip, even 80% of it is untrue. That might be true. So, human nature. Human nature is built to get more information. So, since we're built that way, now we have all of these great new opportunities of which we may avail ourselves, and of those who can provide the information have a market. And gossip does pretty well. Additional information about others, additional information about anything. So, technology. Easier to distribute, easier to find. One of the articles I just saw, which is relatively unbelievable, was there are ways that they've recently found in brain scans that can determine what word you might be thinking about. Now, this is not commercially available, but neither were cell phones 25 years ago. So the thought of this is a little bit mind-boggling to think that, well, think of the great uses. You can go through an airport and somebody's thinking, bomb, bomb, bomb. Good use. Or somebody's trying not to think, bomb, bomb, bomb. But it's technology, and if we all believe we know where it's going, we're naive, because we didn't know where it was going before, and here we are. A regulated society. Now, this is, how much information does government have about each of us? Because we are licensed, we have to turn in information for all sorts of things. Government has that information, and much of it is public. Much of it is available to anybody who looks for it because of public information laws, which, by the way, probably were created at a time when no one thought they would have this much information, or that it would be as readily available. Now, aggregated information. This is the concept that, you know, if you put something out in a file cabinet in Gainesville, Ocala, Trenton, nobody's going to find it. They're probably not going to go look it up. But since we are now digitized in all of these, for example, government files, for example, even court cases, you can look it up. You don't have to go anywhere. So is it different that you can aggregate the information easily than it was before, when information was just sitting in a paper file? Easily searchable, that's part of it. Anybody can find it. Anybody can sit down, look up your name, look up, Google you, or do other types of searches. And it's a disclosure society, which means both in terms of government records, and a lot of folks who are younger than I am believe they can disclose everything. I mean, this is the kind of the Facebook generation. Now, what I'm discovering is the more they learn about the dangers, the less they are enamored of what they're doing. Or when they get hurt. I mean, think of the stories you've heard about somebody sends a sensitive picture to somebody else. They decide they don't like them anymore. They send it to everybody. They're hurt. They then begin to understand you don't. If you're disclosing information, you're putting yourself at risk. The modern press, everybody's a member of the press now. Everybody's got a blog, so you can go global anonymously and get away with a lot. Because we care about free speech and free press. But it's more intrusive than it ever was. And the business of intrusion, that's big business. It's big business to acquire that information. The advertising industry, think about the advertising industry based on location-based marketing. It's supposed to be $3 billion in a couple of years. Because it's great. I mean, they'll know you're there, and they know what you want to buy, and they'll give you a discount. And you're going to like it. You know, a lot of people are going to love this and think it's the best thing that ever happened. These are some extra interesting things. If you didn't read about this one, there was a corporation that installed a tracking device on their rented computers. And of course, the idea was if somebody stole their computer or didn't return it, they would know where it is. Well, it turned on Skype. Now, you don't know that's there. And so this corporation or group can turn on Skype and see you. And the only way they got caught is they came to repossess a computer from somebody, and that person had not been behind their payments. They made a mistake. And the person at the door made a mistake too, because he said, well, we know you have it because we just saw you. He said, what? Well, they're being sued. And that should be pretty serious. Provide social network profiles to employers. Well, that's happening now too. And for kids, I think it's particularly dangerous. I mean, if everything you have said or posted on the internet in terms of pictures might become available to an employer, it might not work out. And the gathering of data from website visits, which I've mentioned, which is also part of marketing. Media. Now, these are a couple of cases in which I was directly involved. You may remember Dale Earnhardt. After his death, there was effort by the media to obtain his autopsy photos, which is hard to understand. The media now will publish anything. Not New York Times, not the Wall Street Journal, but a blog. I mean, do we think that there is a blog who would not publish an autopsy photograph somewhere? Well, I know there is, because he was one of the plaintiffs in the case, and I saw him. And it's one of those things that if you happen to be a lawyer, it's a dream. Because if you wanted to convince anybody that there was a slimy, evil, terrible person, you didn't have to abstractly describe him. He was sitting right there and decided to act as his own lawyer and was cross-examining Teresa Earnhardt. So we won. That the court decided that there is a right to privacy for a family to not have the remains of their loved one disclosed worldwide. You may have recently become aware of the trainer that was killed at SeaWorld. She was killed at SeaWorld about 1.5 years ago. I'm representing her family as well, and we've thus far won. So the question is, this was an underwater video that was taken by SeaWorld of when she was actually being pulled underwater by the whale and died. And the press wanted a copy of that. Now, the judge agreed that there was not a compelling interest for the press to have it, and they don't have it. It, to me, is phenomenal that they would want it. It is even more phenomenal that it would be published, but I can guarantee you it would. It would be on YouTube in 10 minutes. It wouldn't be on a television station because they wouldn't publish it. But that's the understanding of the new media. It isn't the New York Times. It's any blogger. It's the lowest common denominator that's available. So we have to look at all of this a different way. Government, well, we are willing to give up a lot for security. And as long as we feel as if government is successfully protecting us, we're generally in favor of it. But there is warrantless wiretapping. It's got to be justified. But it doesn't go through a judge. It goes through a special kind of judge in certain circumstances. Now, you're probably not wiretapped. The U.S. versus Jones decision I'll mention, you are perhaps aware that a GPS can be put on anything. The location device can be put on anything. This is a case about placing a GPS device without a warrant on a person's car. So the police merely track it wherever it goes. And that could be good. It could be good if it's a drug dealer and you're following him. But it doesn't require a warrant. It can be done on anybody. And the thing that was sort of entertaining, in the United States Supreme Court argument, Justice Roberts asked the attorney for the prosecutor that was supporting this, he said, does this mean you could put a GPS device on my car and track me 24 hours a day for no reason? And he had to say yes. He said yes. So I'm anticipating, based on the tone of the following questions, that Justice Roberts will probably not be voting in favor of warrantless searches available by sticking GPSs on cars. So we just have to be vigilant and understand that unlimited discretion often ends up in abuse. And if you're giving unlimited discretion for this type of thing, a GPS device, I'm not talking about the FBI, I'm talking about local police. Or someone who decided that they thought it was a good idea without any warrant, without any justification. And it's simple. It's really easy. Other people. There are bad people out there. There are a lot of bad people out there. And we're more vulnerable. The Megan Meyer tragedy was about a woman who had become upset at a teenager. She assumed the identity of a young boy. You can do that on the internet. And she proceeded to harass this young girl unmercifully. She finally committed suicide. You don't know who that is on the internet. And they're bad people. This is the 600 friend issue. You know, if there's 600 friends, do you think it's possible for a bad person to figure out a way to friend somebody, to act like they're somebody else? I mean, and that's what I've heard that my students who are now converts say, well, yeah, that could happen. You just pick the name of somebody else in your school who seems like a nice enough person. You assume that identity and say, I'd like to be your friend. And if you're in the mode of accepting everybody as a friend, you got them. And then, depends on what they're capable of just telling you or describing what you should do or learning about you. I mean, where are you? What are you doing? And we know there are current programs now. There's something called Foursquare, which kids know about. And this is, you want everybody to know where you are. So you put your GPS location on your smartphone, and they can know where you are. And so you all know where you're going, and you all know you're at one particular club, not so you can all gather up. But at what point does somebody get that information who you may not want to have that information? Peeping Toms in the digital age, that's Erin Andrews. You may have seen the story today in the paper. Erin Andrews is suing for an invasion of privacy. You may have recalled it was basically a peeping Tom that drilled a hole in a hotel room between his hotel room and hers, videotaped her, and then put it on the internet. So he's going to jail because they found him, and she's suing the hotel and him for the person was able to find out what room she was in and get the room next to it. And there's some problems with that. I'll talk a little bit later about another particularly, I think, horrible piece of disseminating information. Now, the other characteristic of the internet that makes it difficult is the global nature. This Mr. Gutnick was an Australian. The Wall Street Journal said some very, very bad things about him. He sued them in the United States. He lost. You know, we are terrific on free press. You can say a lot of bad things. He then sued them in Australia, and he won. Because the Wall Street Journal had a presence in Australia. So this is going to get very interesting when you have different laws in different places, and in one place you're liable, and in another place you're not. This international commercial transaction, this is a great story because it's practical, and you can see the level of frustration growing with governments. The EU had a rule that you couldn't gather an extreme amount of data about their passengers who boarded in an EU country. The United States at the same time, post 9/11, had a rule that they wanted an extraordinary amount of information about every passenger that landed. So for a period of time, it was impossible for you to take off from an EU country and land in the United States until they worked this out. You can see how the commercial pressure to work that out would be amazing. So everybody compromised, and some of that information was available. But again, the cross-border implications of privacy and the transmission of information on the internet are just beginning to be understood. These are a couple of cases that also bring home the types of intrusions that snowball. Does anybody remember the Shirley Sherrod case? Well, Shirley Sherrod was sort of a third-level Department of Agriculture employee. And one morning, there was a video of her posted, she was an African-American woman, about her practice of discriminating against white farmers. It was just posted by a blogger. By 11 o'clock, it was on CNN. By 2 o'clock, it was everywhere. By 4 o'clock, she was fired, and the NAACP was rejecting her. By later that night, they discovered that it was a falsified video, and by the next morning, everybody was apologizing. Speed of how things travel, and the old game of you whisper something to somebody and to somebody else. Well, now it's global. I mean, somebody posts something on a blog, and immediately some of the mainstream press feel like, well, we got to cover that because that might be true, and somebody else is going to cover that before we do, so we'll cover it. And then everybody reacts to it, and this is just a classic case because it was entirely fabricated and entirely untrue. Everybody published it, everybody bought it, people acted on it, and within 24 hours it was over. The Washingtonian, this is a cautionary note. This woman on her blog in Washington decided she was going to talk about all of her close personal relationships in detail. In excruciating detail. And given that Washington is not that big a place, and if you put enough sort of descriptive things about where somebody works, people started to figure out who she was talking about. And these are extremely embarrassing. The kind of ultimate aside from this is the person that actually finally sued her was a law professor in Texas. Now, one of the things he didn't think all the way through is if you actually bring the lawsuit, it will become even more public than it was before you brought the lawsuit. So there's enormously descriptive material about him in case books now. But he, of course, assumed that this was private information. But the court said, no, you shared it with somebody. And that person had the information, and they used it. Sorry. And by the way, you didn't allege it wasn't true. So you can take that any way you want. So he lost. And it seems quite clear that somebody can comment on intimate details that someone learns about another person, other than if they're married. So that's a bit of a warning as well. I mentioned about getting in an accident and becoming newsworthy. In each of these cases, I was involved in each of these cases. You may remember the Danny Rawling murders. A serial killer in Gainesville killed 6 students. Murder case. The press wanted access to the crime scene photographs and the autopsy photographs. This was a long time ago. This is 1991. At that time, the press, there were no bloggers, and it was only the mainstream press, essentially, that we were dealing with, and they were not hard to deal with. I mean, ultimately, these horrible photographs were very intrusive. The judge decided, and I think rightly, to say, okay, we're not going to release it publicly, but if you want to come in and look, you can. You're a member of the press. I don't know who would want to do that. When Gianni Versace was shot, they spent a month or so collecting information about Gianni's lifestyle, which apparently was very interesting. But it was also something that the family didn't want generally published. And the Rawling case was a murder case and a capital case, and Danny Rawling was, as he should have been, sentenced to death. The Versace case wasn't a murder trial. There was nobody to try. In other words, there's more of a justification to the public to be aware of what was used in a murder trial, because we in the United States want our trials to be open. But the good news was, even though that was a murder trial, the judge decided to keep that from being released. So logically, they certainly shouldn't be released if there wasn't even a trial. And that was the same with Dale Earnhardt's autopsy photos and with the Bracheau case. There's a case that demonstrates how badly the press can act, and people can act, and bloggers. There's a young woman in California, her name is Nicole Katsouris. She died in an automobile accident. She was 18. She, at a high speed, ran into a toll booth and was grotesquely injured. The California Highway Patrol took pictures of her, as they should, in the course of an investigation. Well, these guys decided that those pictures were entertaining, so they sent them to 10 of their friends on Halloween. And they're gone. I mean, once it's in the hands of 10 people, then it's in the hands of 100, then it's in the hands of 1,000, and that family is devastated, litigating, et cetera. And to reemphasize the fact that there are really disturbed people on the internet, there were people that sent those pictures to the parents. And in a way that the parents would open it. So, and you know what? We don't know who they were. We don't know who they were. And they worked very hard, and the Highway Patrol is going to be in deep trouble. They're going to have to pay the family a significant amount of money for their injury. And the problem is, if you go on the internet and try to search that name, there are 40,000 locations. You can't get it off. It won't go away. Now, and I'll conclude with this. So what are we going to do about this? You got to decide whether we care. And I think there's some of us that do. There's some of us, some of my students, some of the folks in the younger generation are not quite sure they care yet because they haven't had the experience and they haven't had the kind of intrusive occurrence that'll change your mind. Law and technology. Technology is going to evolve. The law, I'm a lawyer, the law is not able to catch up to technology. It rarely is. It's always behind and looking for remedies that sometimes are just not there. So what could we do? We could minimize the collection of information. That would require a different approach. We would have to start thinking about how much information needs to be collected for all these purposes and maybe stop it. You know, we've even done it in a couple of cases. Social Security numbers, you'll notice that now they're not collected. So that is a beginning, that there's certain information that ought not to be collected because it's so fraught with danger for all sorts of purposes, including identity theft, that maybe we just not ought to collect it. Ensure accuracy, that's hard. But if you get it wrong, there should be a consequence. And people are harmed by it. There was I'll mention a case. A woman in Arkansas was applying for a job as to teach family law. Well, she didn't get the job because after the search was done on her, the school that was reviewing her application discovered that she was a child abuser. Only problem was she wasn't a child abuser. And the information was negligently collected. So we hope and think that perhaps those who negligently connected it should be punished for getting it wrong. Minimize disclosure. Do we need to disclose everything? Does everything need to be made public? Provide information to individuals about themselves. This is actually something I talked to Ken about, and we have some ideas about how to provide individuals with information about themselves. You need to know your internet profile. You need to know what you look like on the internet because it may not look like you at all. It may be incorrect, misleading, and I'm particularly concerned about younger people who are more exposed and have put themselves in a position to have more misleading information about them than anyone ever has in history. And enforce and penalize wrongdoing. That we need accountability in this like we do in everything else. If you distribute information that's inaccurate and you harm people, there should be a consequence. You shouldn't be able to get away with being negligent about the distribution of information. And so ultimately, that quote, that's the cover of my book, but that quote, "You have no privacy anyway, get over it," was from, guess what? An internet executive. So my message is, let's not get over it. That there actually are ways to address it. There are ways to understand it, and there are ways to bring our children and other people who are vulnerable into understanding what they can do and how vulnerable they are. So I would now like to respond to questions. Yes, sir.
Hello? Yes, it is. Okay, my name is George, and this is particularly of interest to me. It's always bugged me that people can take information about me and sell it and get lots of money, and I get nothing. So I've always wondered, is it possible to copyright information about me?
Well, that is a very interesting statement because some people have talked about that. The concept is that if people are selling information about you, it must be worth something.
They make billions.
So it is worth something. So is that a property interest? Is that a property interest? And one of the solutions we talk about is reevaluating the definition of property in some of these situations, because you realize the taking of your whole identity and using it and selling it is worth a lot more than a set of shoes that somebody might steal. But if they steal your shoes, they stole. If they capture your identity and sell it, too bad. So this is what I was talking about when saying the law is behind the curve. There is something there that we need to understand better about the value of what's going on. Now, you understand that there are multi-billion-dollar companies that think that's a terrible idea. So at some point, there are going to be some resolutions of that issue. Now, see, copyright is an example of information that you can't steal. And there are other examples of information that is property. Now, one example is if somebody is a sports figure, you just can't take their picture and put it on a Wheaties box without paying them. You're using their image to make money. And it's just their image. But that's property. So, good point.
You want to do a test case?
Okay. Yes, ma'am. And you can help me see these.
The one thing that you didn't touch on was our healthcare databases, which does have our Social Security numbers on it. You know, my doctor was able to get up to St. Louis and find out everything about me. I can't believe that there are not hackers or other informational, databases that can't access those.
Well, HIPAA, which is the law that is supposed to take care of this, is actually one of the better laws about saying that information should not be distributed. Also, as a matter of perspective, it's interesting that the medical industry, or doctors, have as part of the Hippocratic Oath confidentiality. In other words, you have a group of people who want to keep this information confidential generally. And what's happening is technology is overcoming part of that as well as the law. Now, you may be talking about the move to make your healthcare information available anywhere. So I think that's happening. Conceptually, the positive part of that is supposed to be if you get in an accident in St. Louis, your records of allergies, et cetera, are immediately available, and that might be life-saving. One of the elements of all these privacy intrusions, again, is human nature, or just the fact that we're humans or imperfect. So there are lots of data breaches, and we tend to hear about them a lot when they relate to medical information. I mean, they've happened in Gainesville, they've happened in a whole number of places. And that can either be because someone stole it, or someone left a computer out, or it was just an accident. And that is the most sensitive of information. And that's an instance where I think the law has tried. And so I think it's an enforcement issue. And they're not supposed to be revealed. But can we start back there, or maybe go ahead?
You mentioned a few minutes ago we don't know who they are. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about anonymity in the internet. A lot of the mischief that you've described is done by people anonymously on the internet. What does the law have to say about when people can be unmasked on the internet, and how technologically feasible is it to do it?
Well, that's a great question because another human characteristic is that sometimes people are willing to do things anonymously that they wouldn't do if they had to put their name on it. Let's just say a lot of times people would be willing to do things anonymously. And that's easy, we all understand that. Anonymity is fairly easy on the internet. I'll give you an example of a case. There was a woman in California who was a corporate executive. She was treated pretty badly by a blog, very badly. She had to sue Google because they didn't know the identity. So here's what the law does. The law does this in 2 stages. Stage 1 is prove to the judge that you have a likelihood of winning a slander case, and then they will order Google to disclose it. In that case, they denied it. They said, we're not going to order Google to disclose it. There's another case in New York where they did. So it's uneven. I mean, there are ways, if people are blogging and are with certain sites, you can find out who they are, but you have to dig. And I also got to say that in the United States, anonymity has been a part of the concept of free speech and individualism. So we have a lot of people that published pamphlets during the American Revolution anonymously. There are people that, so there's a place for anonymity, but you mix anonymity with this technology and with the bad part of human nature, and it's a bad mix. So you have to start figuring out how to uncover those, punish people who have abused and hurt others. But it's a great question because it's difficult technologically and legally. Okay, we have 3. 1, 2, 3.
You mentioned that the law is not keeping up with the technology, essentially. With our advanced technology, why can't we close that gap between that? And is somebody working on that, or should somebody be working on that?
That again is a great question. I think a lot of people are working on it, but the law moves pretty slowly. And if you are discussing some of the instances of the gathering of information, et cetera, or even the distribution of certain information, the forces that come out against those reforms are interesting. So almost any disclosure or elevation of issues dealing with defamation and slander are generally opposed by the press. And so you have a large group of people who don't want to change those standards, even though what I said to you before is the standards are tougher in other countries. I mean, you can, I referred to libel tourism. There are individuals generally well-known across borders who go to Europe to sue for libel because they can win. There are forces in the data collection area that don't want to treat them as property. So the policy reforms have a lot of headwinds. And the law itself is operating from old privacy torts, you know, things like invasion of privacy, intrusion upon seclusion, public disclosure of private facts. And some of those work, some of those don't. Aaron Andrews is going to win on intrusion upon seclusion and several statutes. It depends on the facts, but there's a distinction. The law is trying to evolve from some of those old torts and figure out, can we make it a property interest? I mean, can somebody argue that successfully? And then there are the larger questions of the federal statutes and the state statutes that are making policy, and they're not generally going to be consensus policies. And the question is, where is the individual privacy lobby? Nowhere. It's everybody, but it's nobody, and when there are specific forces against it, it's hard.
I have a two-part question. Part one, why not simply every computer that's online download all the time it's on the line and fill a system so full that nobody can find anything?
Crash the world. No, it's a solution, but I don't think it'll help most of us.
The second part is, why not charge 48 cents per communication, just like we do at the post office, so that if you want to talk to 100 people, you spend $48.
Well, you understand exactly who's going to oppose that too. And That could be almost everybody because we're used to it. I mean, we are completely used to the fact that we can send emails to hundreds of people, and our kids are used to the fact they can post it to 600 of their friends for free. And so if you...
Not if we charge for it.
Well, not if we charge for it, but...
And then use the money we charge to sue the people that are slandering.
Well, that's fine with me. Sign me up for that.
Time for one more question.
Okay.
For a long time, I have sought various things or services on the telephone, and people have asked me for my credit card number or my Social Security number, and I gave them the whole thing. I wanted it, so they asked for it. I assumed they were getting smarter, because now they're only asking for the last 4 numbers. The other day, the voice on the phone said, "Can I have your last 5 Social Security?" And it stumped me. I'm not used to remembering that many numbers.
Me either.
But what's going on? Why are they going up to 5?
Well, because it'd be easier to find you. Let me tell you something about that. When I went to some of these conferences that involve lawyers and law professors, there are some technology people there. And one of the things that we've tried to protect is what we call personally identifiable information, PII, personally identifiable information. The Social Security number is certainly that. You know, something that is associated with your identity. And there are other things that are associated with your identity. And we have traditionally felt that the last 4 digits of your Social Security number were not personally identifiable information. Well, what several of these folks told me was, well, our search engines are really good. And all we need is a zip code, an age, and any part of your Social Security number, and we'll probably be able to figure out exactly who you are. So, you know, it is, if you have massive amounts of data, are one of the things that some of the other countries that are paying closer attention to this, they're changing the definition of a personally identifiable information. And so you have to be concerned with disclosing any significant amount of information because that's a moving target. I mean, that once you disclose 3 or 4 pieces of information, it is easier and easier to be able to identify who you are. Now, you know, one of the things many of these survey, if it's a survey, they're saying we don't want to know who you are individually, we just want to know what your demographic does so we can market to that demographic. And that may be true, but in gathering that information, it's not at all clear that at a later time it couldn't sort another way. So I wouldn't do it.
Let's thank our speaker.